Let me see. Am I work? Oh, are you here to see me, Chief? Feel free to take the time to look at the new supplies, too. Face your fear head on. Face your fear head on.
Death is your own destination. Please enjoy the show. Good show's about to start. Good show's about to start. Death is your...
Face your fear head on.
Please enjoy the show. Good show's about to start. I'll take this light. I'll take this light. Good show's about to start. I'll take this light. Good show's about to start. All dreams vanish.
Let's talk about speedrun. We wanted to start this video off with the most iconic tech in speedrunning, so we did a little research. I asked my girlfriend, who knows basically nothing about video games, hey, do you know anything about speedrunning? Her answer was, is that the thing where the shy guy goes big mode? Why does she even know that? Well, she was half right. We're starting things off with Super Mario 64 and the backwards long jump. If you haven't seen Mario do this, I'm going to fly for you, or at least heard of a BLJ, you're in for a treat. This is the speedrunning tech. It unlocks ways of playing the game that are otherwise impossible. What are you kidding, dude? And it turns Mario from a plumber into an intercontinental ballistic missile. So how does it work? Well, movement in Super Mario 64 is kept track of in a pretty simple way. When moving forward, Mario has a positive speed. When he's moving backwards, he has a negative speed. Under normal circumstances, Mario has a hard cap of how fast he can move forward. For example, when long jumping forward, Mario has a maximum speed of plus 48. However, the devs neglected to put this same cap in the negative direction. Normally, this isn't a problem, as the game has ways of slowing you down naturally. But in the November 2000 issue of Club Nintendo Mexico, Jose Angel Ruiz Villarreal and Dante Ivan Ruiz were credited with discovering that if you long jump forward and then repeatedly jump backwards on a slope, you can store the momentum value of each jump and accelerate Mario to warp speed. Two claimed that if you did this technique in the Endless Stairs, you could skip a big portion of the game. The Endless Stairs is the path that leads to the game's final level, Bowser in the Sky. Once you earn 50 stars playing the game, the door to the Endless Stairs unlocks. Unfortunately, you need 70 stars to actually make it to the top. If you try to ascend without 70 stars, Mario collides with an invisible checkpoint that tells the game to warp you backwards a few feet, and hitting this checkpoint over and over and over again gives the illusion that the stairs are endless.
I'ma think I go crazy.
Here's where the backwards long jump comes in. By making Mario go faster and faster, he starts covering more ground on each frame. So, every time he hits the checkpoint, he gets a little bit further than he did on the previous jump. Eventually, no part of his body touches the checkpoint at all, and the game is like... Password. Cool. and he bum rushes his way to the top of the staircase, no questions asked. On March 16, 2003, GameFAQs user Jera2000 posted the first video evidence of the glitch, confirming that the game could in fact be finished with only 50 stars. But that's not all. In 2003, players discovered you could clip through the 50-star door by backwards long jumping on this staircase, bringing the minimum star requirement down to 31. Not long after, they brought it down to 16 with the MIP skip. Then, it was discovered in 2006 that you could glitch out of bounds in the lobby. Then, by performing a BLJ out of bounds, you can gain access to the first boss room, giving you the key to the basement while still at 0 stars. From here, another BLJ can be opened. Unfortunately, has existed in some form or another in many different games. Half-Life, Portal, Left 4 Dead, and of course Counter-Strike. Basically, if it was an FPS running on the source engine, there's a good chance it featured the technique. How bunny hopping works in each game is a little bit different, but the gist of it is that you gain momentum in the air by strafing, and maintain that momentum from one jump to the next by jumping on the first possible frame. This tricks the game into thinking that you never touch the ground, allowing you to build up speed that would otherwise be impossible. To be more consistent, many players bind jump to the mouse scroll wheel, allowing them to spam jumps while in the air to ensure that sweet frame 1 input every single time. For Half-Life, Portal, and Left 4 Dead 1 and 2, bunny hopping is the foundation of speedrun world records. In Half-Life 2, however, the devs capped you at just under 400 velocity using traditional bunny hopping techniques. But, much like in Super Mario 64, that only applies if you're moving forwards. Going backwards, you can go about 10 times that. Seriously, did all the devs just forget to test jumping backwards? David, explain yourself.
The entire team was an ass, and we won't be working with them again.
Okay. In Counter-Strike, bunny hopping even has its own minigames. People have created maps and obstacle courses you can bounce around on, and it's pretty much a game all its own. Even modern games like Titanfall and Titanfall 2, which were made using a modified version of the source engine, have bunny hopping as an integral part of their speedrunning.
Don't blink. Don't blink. A mere moment separates real and fake.
Sword flying is a technique in Halo 2 where you can cover huge distances with a single swing of the energy sword. Here's how it works. Every weapon in Halo 2 has an effective range where the reticle will turn red when pointed at an enemy. For some weapons, this indicates that aim assist is active. For others, like the rocket launcher, it allows you to lock onto vehicles and fire a homing missile. And for weapons like the sniper rifle, it just means, well, this is gonna hurt. The energy sword in Halo also has an effective range despite being a melee weapon. When the sword is swung outside of its effective range, you slice air. But if you're aimed at an enemy and the reticle is red, your character will lunge forward, closing the distance and guaranteeing a kill. Sword flying abuses this lunge mechanic by tricking the game into thinking that an enemy over there is within range. By holding a gun, usually a rocket launcher, beam rifle, or sniper rifle, you aim at an enemy, press Y then X in quick succession to swap to your energy sword and reload, and then hit the right trigger as the energy sword is coming out. 2-frame window is hit correctly, you'll lunge towards the enemy, regardless of how far away they are. Needless to say, this technique revolutionized Halo 2 speedrun. But it took a while. In 2005, sword flying was patched out of Halo 2's multiplayer in Auto Update 3, a system-wide update that patched all games using Xbox Live. However, the devs made the decision to leave it in the campaign as the community was having a lot of fun with it. Then, in 2014, 343 announced Halo 2 Anniversary Edition. The game featured old techniques like BXB and BXR, which were staples of competitive Halo 2, but the game's physics systems were changed a little bit, removing techniques like sword flying. But then, in 2018, 343 did something unexpected. They rebalanced the game's physics systems, reintroducing sword flying in all their glory. Suddenly, the door on Halo 2 speedrunning was blown open, and quickly, the record started falling. Since then, Halo 2A has seen a resurgence in popularity, and is a rare instance of a developer unfixing glitches in their game to make the community happy. Actually, you know what the sword flying glitch is best used for? We'll show you.
More accurately, an exploit, but whatever.
Our last glitch completely upended an entire speedrunning community and invalidated years of pathing in the any percent category. This is The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time. Ganondorf Wrong Warp. A wrong warp is a technique used to access parts of the game out of the intended order. In Ocarina of Time, there's a list of all the possible cutscenes, spawn locations, and entrances which reference each other and allow the game to move forward in a sequential order. For example, when you go through a door, the game will load the next room or play the appropriate cutscene, and everything makes sense. Enter the blue warp. Blue warps pop up after things like boss battles and allow Link to warp to other parts of the map. Once you touch the warp, loses control of Link, and an invisible timer starts counting up. When this timer hits 101, it locks in what scene is about to be loaded, the screen starts to fade out, and once it hits 153, Link gets warped. Nothing you can do about it. But players figured out a way to regain control of Link during this animation. By jumping backwards and doing some item switching in mid-air, you can play your sword like an ocarina as you touch the blue warp. Suddenly, you'll have control over Link while the timer is counting up to 101, and speedrunners figured out that if you unalive yourself while warping, with a bomb, or by taking damage from something, you can skip the next cutscene and save a few seconds. However, a major discovery was made by Christian F23 in the Fire Temple, where jumping into the fire and dying resulted not only in skipping the cutscene, but actually warping Link to a completely different part of the game. Players quickly figured out tons of other ways to warp to the wrong part of the game, and even to the end credits. If you want an in-depth explanation on what's going on when the game makes these calculations, Bismuth made a great video breaking it down. While these techniques were used to shave several minutes off the any percent category, there's one wrong warp that completely upended it. In the Deku Tree, the first dungeon of the game, you fight a boss called Queen Goma. You can make this wall disappear, either by clipping through it, saving, quitting, and reloading, or by dying on the same frame that you beat Goma. Either way, you leave the room, re-enter, and the wall is gone. From here, you do the backflip sword ocarina thing we mentioned earlier, and move a certain distance away from the blue warp, which stops the timer from counting up, as long as you're looking away from the blue warp. Now, you move in a very specific way to go through this door on the 101st frame of the blue warp timer. Doing it frame perfect will confuse the game into thinking you're going through the blue warp, but also going through the door at the same time. The result? You warp straight to Ganon's castle, the last level of the game. All you have to do now is escape the castle and finish the last boss fight. Because of how early this skip is in the game, it's even faster than the credit wrong warp. When this glitch was discovered in 2012, it essentially invalidated 14 years of pathing and optimization by the Ocarina of Time speedrunning community. And if you wanted any chance of getting the any percent world record, you had to learn this glitch. Since then, even more discoveries have been made in Ocarina of Time. Recently, tons of effort and time have been put into techniques like arbitrary code executions, lowering the time further than what could be done with the Ganondorf wrong warp. But still, Ganondorf is one of the most famous examples of speedrunning ingenuity and is beloved by speedrunners to this day. Shoutout and thanks to Cloud, Steph, B, Pass, Shampoo, and Yashichi for being patrons of the channel. If you enjoyed the video, leaving a like, subscribing, and hitting the bell to stay up to date is much appreciated. My name is Jonah, thanks for watching.
Alright, Raren, you and I have done a few of these now, and today I think is going to be quite a fun one for you. So I think you and I actually did this over on your channel with Hearthstone cards, but today I am going to be showing you some of the most toxic Yu-Gi-Oh cards that you've ever seen, and you've got two goals today. Your goals are to tell me, one, if you think the card is good, and then two, if you think the card was actually banned on top of it. How you feeling about that?
So you're showing me every single Yu-Gi-Oh card that's ever existed?
Pretty much, yeah, that's the plan. I think we can do that in an hour, right?
Okay,
We'll run it, right? PB, we got a PB.
I'm done. I'm actually excited for this, to see what you guys consider, like, toxic. Is Maxi the first card?
Maxi actually is the first card, because that was the card I was the most curious about on your perspective.
Well, so I actually know what Maxi does, right? Because, like, I had the I was going to say the luxury. I had the experience of playing basketball, and this card obviously is very good.
Why don't you read it for people who aren't familiar?
Maxi is, during either player's turn, you can send this card from your hand to the graveyard. This turn, each time your opponent special summons a monster or monsters, immediately draw a card. You don't know, drawing cards in Yu-Gi-Oh! Is very good.
I hear it's okay.
It's amazing, and in fact, this card allows you to win a game that you have no right winning, and it also makes your opponent feel fucking miserable with it. You're like, oh shit, I'm about to draw so many cards. The positive thing about Maxi, to be honest, is there's sometimes that minigame where you have to ask yourself, like, do I just rip it? Like, and just hope for the best? That's the only, like, decision that really matters. But
that's a positive?
Out of everything in the world for Yu-Gi-Oh! That's the only thing I can give it. I don't know. Basically, I'm surprised this card is not banned. At least in Master Duel, like, I guess it's banned in locals. You're gonna have to correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, so it's banned in the TCG, but it's legal in the OCG, which is like the Asian territories, and it's legal in Master Duel. Yes.
It's obviously very fun.
I'm just curious because since you're the Yu-Gi-Oh! Master now that we've seen you play on your channel, I was curious what your overall thoughts were now that you've gotten to experience the insect for yourself.
So, I don't know how many card games you've actually played. I know you used to play Magic, but I don't think I've ever seen a card with that amount of play rate across any card game I've ever played. Like,
yeah, so for people who don't know, Maxi has like a 95% play rate on Master Duel. It hovers in the 90 percentile every time they give us the statistics for it. It's disgusting.
Yeah, just for context as well, like, Hearthstone right now has a pretty ubiquitous card across classes. Obviously, in Yu-Gi-Oh! There's no, like, Yu-Gi-Oh! Doesn't have classes, but Hearthstone has, like, the neutral pool, and at the moment, the highest percentage after its nerf is 60%. So, like, just to give you context, before it used to be 66 before the nerf. But that's the highest, and that card is considered very, very good. So, like, think about 95 percentile of, like, how ridiculous Maxi is.
Yep. So now let me ask you this: like, do you feel like are you a fan of this card? Do you hate this card? Like, where do you stand with this?
Well, so how do I answer this?
Let me answer for you. Let me take a guess. You like when you activate it against your opponent.
Yeah.
You hate when it's activated against you.
When my opponent plays, I'm gonna throw up. I think Maxi actually is probably a necessary evil in some cases. Like, but it's probably not great that you can play it. Maybe it might have to be like a preemptive thing. Like, you know what I mean? Maybe they should make it so, like, you have to activate on your turn, and then, like, your opponent's next turn is when you actually draw the cards. I don't know even know how they fix it. They probably just have to ban it. It's probably not healthy. It felt like a lot of games came down to, did I get this card in my opening hand? The counter argument is, do I have, like, the Ash to actually block it?
Yep, which is why Ash has the second highest play rate, because it's one of the best cards to counter Maxi. One thing that's interesting is that at the current moment in the TCG, they're actually releasing a new archetype of cards. Basically do what Maxi does, but they have more restrictions, but they still do the, draw one card for each type of special summon. But they have the restrictions that I believe you can't control any cards, and then it only, like, works in certain areas of the game. So, like, I think the first one they released only works on monsters special summon from the hand, so the graveyard and the deck are off limits. But the second one, I think, it works from the main deck or extra deck, and then people are assuming the third one that's going to be released in a future set is going to work from the graveyard or banished pile. So they took Maxi and, like, broke it down into different pieces just to show how powerful it is, and people are still playing those versions of Maxi. So, like, in the OCG, they have 9 Maxis right now, effectively.
Oh my god.
Doesn't that sound fun? Doesn't that sound great?
Yeah. You know what's even funnier? It's I think Stevie showed me this card like the very first time I looked at Yu-Gi-Oh cards, and I think this card's bad. I don't think I've ever heard that man scream so loud. Like this is the best part of the game.
It is basically like the best card in the game. Yeah, it's interesting though, because to be fair, when it was first released, it actually wasn't considered to be very good because special summoning wasn't like what you've experienced it as in modern Yu-Gi-Oh! At most, this card was released in like 2011, 2012. At most, you would maybe special summon a couple times in a turn, and so a lot of people would just not play Max C, or maybe you would see play in like the sideboard. And it took Yu-Gi-Oh! Evolving into what it's become today for Max C to really be this like just overwhelming force throughout the game.
Well, good luck.
Thanks.
Good luck.
So this, I wanted to get your opinion on this first, because you've already seen this card. So hopefully a lot of the other cards I show you today are cards you haven't seen before. Now keep in mind, they're not all going to be as good as Max C, and I'm throwing some in here to potentially mess with you, so you're going to have to figure out if the cards are actually good or not, and then obviously you can determine whether or not they are banned. So let's go ahead and throw up the next card here. Let's move on to a spell card.
Kaiser Colosseum? There's one or more monsters on the field of the controller of this card. His/her opponent cannot place a monster on the field if his/her number of monsters would exceed the number of monsters that are on the field of this card's controller. The cards that are already on the field before this card activation are unaffected by this. Okay, so if I have one monster and then I play this, my opponent can't have more than one monster on their field unless they kill this. Is that really? Okay, so see, the word toxic in Yu-Gi-Oh is so difficult because there's so much nonsense in this game. Like Harsh said, it's very obvious when like a card is just egregious and like it needs help, or we need to do something about that card like pretty fast. Like this is an effect that I think if it was in Hearthstone, like it'd be nerfed like so quickly. Oh my god, that'd be so annoying. Even like I've been playing a ton of Magic recently. I think in Magic this would also be like extremely annoying to play against.
So if it's really annoying for Hearthstone, and if it's really annoying for Magic, is it really annoying for Yu-Gi-Oh?
See that's the line. Like that's I don't know. Like I think in terms of like actually how you would feel about it, yeah, it's pretty annoying. But is it really good enough to see play when you can just pop the back row? Because like it's just monsters, right? Like there's a card that probably answers this for the most part. But that's a very good effect. But like, what if you have no monsters on the board? It's just a useless card.
If you have no monsters on the field, then your opponent can summon as much as they want.
I'm never like my Hearthstone brain's telling me, yeah, this is fun. The part of me that used to play Yu-Gi-Oh! And they never go back is telling me like, this could be worse.
I'm glad Yu-Gi-Oh's rubbed off on you that way. Like, it could be worse. It could be Max C.
I mean, realistically, it could be Max C. I guess the question I should ask myself is, would I rather, like, is Max C infinitely worse than this card? You're stopping your opponent from summoning, but at least if they have an answer to the Colosseum, then it's like, okay, I mean, we can still do my turn like normal. But Max C's like, yeah, you can summon your monsters, but I'm also getting stuff, so, like, be careful.
I think they're two different cards. Right?
They do, yeah, for sure. I'm just thinking,
they're diametrically opposed.
The potential of Max C, I think, is so much higher than this card, though.
If it makes you feel any better, Max C was released, I want to say, 8 years after this card was released.
Okay, so this is a pretty old card.
You can tell, it just looks old by the image.
Normally when we do these videos, where usually, like, we talk about, like, the early days of Yu-Gi-Oh! I'm guessing we're talking throughout, like, Yu-Gi-Oh!'s history.
I mean, you can analyze, like, both older and newer. I'm going by, like, current day.
Current day, okay. Current day, I don't think this is good enough. So I don't think it's banned. But I can see it being played at some point to counter, like, a meta deck, but I'm just not really sure if that's the case, because there might just be better cards to remove it, so I'll just say it's not good.
Final answer?
That's my final answer.
Well, you could not be more wrong, because all your intuition was correct, and then you decided to go against it. This card is extremely toxic for all the reasons you aforementioned, right? It's really frustrating, especially when you maybe see this card in tandem with some of the other cards in Yu-Gi-Oh! That if you stick a monster that's very hard to kill, let's say, or has like some other floodgate type effect to prevent your opponent from playing, and now all of a sudden you back it up with Kaiser Colosseum, now they can't even summon more monsters to like deal with the monster that you put out, and then they're basically just stuck there. It's one of those cards that is absolutely atrocious to play against, even by like earlier Yu-Gi-Oh! Standards. This card has seen like a ton of play, and anytime this card is played, everyone just grows. It's so fucking atrocious.
It's interesting that like I would think especially in modern Yu-Gi-Oh, like there would be a way to deal with this card like pretty easily.
It depends, right? Because a lot of the resourcefulness or toolboxiness in Yu-Gi-Oh! Nowadays resides in the extra deck. So it requires you to have multiple monsters on the field to either synchro summon or Z-summon or lake summon or whatever you're doing. And if your opponent just has one monster, you're not even allowed to put 2 monsters on the field, so you can't access that toolboxiness. So, like, a lot of the spell and trap removal might be in the extra deck because, as a player, you might think, oh, if I need to do this, I can just go to my extra deck where I can access it all times, rather than hoping I draw the card from my main deck to out the Kaiser Coliseum. Right? That's not to say people don't play spell and trap removal. They of course they do, but you might not see that in the first game. Maybe in the games 2 or 3, once the sideboard's in play, if people know, oh, I might get Kaiser Coliseum, I need to make sure I have it, my back row hate to be able to make sure I can actually play the game. It's one of those cards that the player sets up, and it's like, out my board or lose the game type of card. Kaiser Coliseum is just very disgusting as a result of that. It's one of the oldest instances. There are probably worse offenders nowadays, which we may or may not see later. But it's a very old card and a very annoying one. And it's banned both in the TCG and the OCG. I don't know about Master Duel. I would imagine it's banned there, but it might actually be legal, which is weird if it is.
I don't know. Maybe it's just like I didn't go against this card once when I played Yu-Gi-Oh! So that makes me think like maybe it's not as good as I.
Well, that might be because if it's banned in Master Duel, that's why we never played it. This card you may have seen in Master Duel. Let me just think about this one.
Skill Draining. Activate this card by paying 1,000 life points, negate the effects of all face-up monsters while they're face-up on the field, but their effects can still be activated. So, like, this is if a monster activates their effect, then you proc this.
So it doesn't have to activate its effects. For instance, if there's a monster that has a continuous effect that says this card cannot be destroyed by battle, Skill Drain will negate that, so that monster can now be destroyed by battle. The last part where it says, but their effects can still be activated, means that you can still activate their effects. It's just when the effect resolves, it'll be negated. So for instance, if there's a monster that says cost, discard a card, effect, do whatever, the cost can still be paid, but the effect won't go through. So there's like some like little gimmicks you can do with Skill Drain, like as a result.
Oh, okay. That's I guess that's kind of interesting. So just a further like example, like I couldn't use Baron's effect to like pop a card off the board.
Right. So the play pattern there would be like if you go Baron effect. Well, this is probably going to be a bad example because it's Baron exactly. But if you went Baron effect, pop a card, I would activate Skill Drain in response, and then you could chain Baron to negate Skill Drain, which doesn't help in this example. But let's say Skill Drain was out before you summoned Baron. If you summoned Baron, then try to activate the Baron to pop something, then it would just negate it. You wouldn't be able to pop anything with Baron, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. Right, so this is just like mobile counter spell for every monster on the board.
Pretty much. Like, how would this work in Hearthstone? Or is there a card that does this in Hearthstone?
They wouldn't print something like this in Hearthstone. I guess they have printed this, but this card is very like...
But it stays on the field. It's a continuous trap as well.
Yeah, Hearthstone's very... They don't like effects like this, where it kind of stops your opponent from, like, playing their deck. But sure, they give you the tools to at least fight against it. This constant aura would be, like, extremely frustrating. But also, I don't know how it would work in Hearthstone, because, like, in Yu-Gi-Oh! It's often you would use the effect when it's on board. Like, there's very few instances of cards that are like that. Like, Titans are, like, the few example of that. Where a lot of it's, like, Battlecry, right? So... Like, it uses their effect before they even go on the board.
Oh, is that how it works in Hearthstone? Interesting. I don't think I, knew that mechanically.
There's very few cards. There's actually, I think... Oh, I'm trying to get in my mind. I think there's only one card in the history of Hearthstone that stops, like, a Battlecry.
Interesting.
And people hated that card with an absolute passion. Did I show you that card? It was called Objection, like, the toxic episode.
You did show me that, yes,
like,
yes.
That's, like, the only card in the game that has stopped, like, Battlecries. And, like, people, like, that is one of the most hated cards of all time. Like, if not one. Because people, it just feels miserable to play against it. So I can't even imagine an effect, like, if it said, like, stop all Battlecries your opponent plays. Like, holy fuck, I'd lose my mind against that shit. If that's the same case it is in Yu-Gi-Oh!, this card's probably, like, pretty great. Again, the question comes down to, how devastating is an effect like this? I guess it's pretty great, because it seems like you said, like, a lot of the monsters, you need a lot of effects from, like, your extra deck, which require, like, effects from monsters. And, like, if I remember anything from Yu-Gi-Oh!, like, you really need to use your effects on monsters. Like, they win you games. Mm-hmm. So, unless there is a card that you have that is, I guess, a spell to, like, pop this, you're in a really bad spot. like probably in an infinitely worse spot than it is with Colosseum. I'm actually not sure what card is actually more annoying here.
Interesting. Okay.
Now that you say that, I think this card's worse. And the fact that it's an aura is really annoying, but so is the Colosseum. And if the Colosseum's a really good card, I imagine Skill Drain's almost at the same level. But I guess the Colosseum is more limiting, because you could still, I guess, get cards out of your extra deck. You just can't use their effect unless you got another card. Or Colosseum is like, you're stopping your opponent from playing the game. I think this card's still good, though. I'm just trying to, like, I'm like, second-guessing because of what happened with Colosseum.
You're in your head.
Yeah, in Hearthstone, I think this card, like, obviously this card would be one of the most frustrating things. I mean, I consider that, like, every Yu-Gi-Oh card at this point.
That's true. Honestly, by the end of this, you're going to be probably saying that about every card I show you.
I'm just gonna get like a little tangent here. I've been recently. I played Hearthstone for like since its closed beta, right? I've always like, I fucking hate this game. It's so bad now. Like, it's so awful because like you're just playing your card game. Like you played it for so long. So I'm like, I go play Magic. If you haven't played Magic, you play Magic, but like if people who are watching this haven't played Magic, right? It is a really good game. But there's also really dumb shit in it, at least in my opinion. Like, I'm not a huge fan of lands. I don't know how you feel about lands. But going from, like, a passive mana system to lands and Magic makes me want to throw up. Sure. I'm like, you know what? Hearthstone actually isn't that bad. So I go back to Hearthstone. And then it's the same cycle over and over again. So
it's like, perspective, right? It's perspective.
So, like, maybe Yu-Gi-Oh! Is actually amazing. But then if I don't play Yu-Gi-Oh! It's like skill drain to me. I'm like, I don't want to play this game anymore. So, I don't know. I feel like if this is so difficult for me, you have no idea, because I feel like a Magic player would have a much easier time than a Hearthstone player, because at least Blizzard doesn't want to punish its players like this.
Yeah, it's interesting, because I feel like Hearthstone, what you've been saying, and from what I've learned when we do our videos on your channel, I feel like Hearthstone really learned from Magic and Yu-Gi-Oh! And I don't know about Pokemon really, because I don't know too much about that game, about just like cards that like don't let you play the game and how like they're unfun, right? Where like Magic, I believe, has cards that are probably equally as annoying as Skill Drain, if not more so. And I feel like Hearthstone, just from a design perspective, is like, okay, we're going to try to not have these. But to be fair, our games are also fundamentally different in that we can interact with the opponent during their turn, where Hearthstone you can't.
Yes.
But that doesn't mean you couldn't still have stuff like the Kaiser Coliseum, hypothetically, a trap card, so like that could theoretically exist in Hearthstone.
Yeah.
Whether or not that's good is a different story, but
I think they've done a really good job of not printing cards like this. Like I've showed you, like obviously, like I showed you like toxic cards considering, but nothing is like Skill Drain. Like nothing is like go fuck yourself. Like when you play. There's nothing truly like that in the game. So, for my Hearthstone brain, I think this card is good. I'd imagine it did see play. I could see it banned, but I mean, a Colosseum is banned, but I think it's fucking Maxi, bro. I don't know. I'm gonna go with it's probably not banned, but I can see it being good.
All right, final answer.
Final answer.
Skill Drain's also an old card. I think this version I showed you is actually quite new. But Skill Drain, I think, came out actually before Kaiser Coliseum, potentially. And if not, it was like within a set or two. But very old card. Skill Drain was just as annoying back then as it was today. Skill Drain is still to this day a card that it's gone all over the ban list. I don't know if it's actually ever been banned. I think it may have been. It's been limited several times and was at 1 for a very long period of time. But sometimes it'll go from 1 to 3 to 2. They just put it wherever the fuck they want. It was never really, I want to say, part of a tier 1 dominating, like, meta contender. It's always typically used in two ways. It's either in a deck that has, like, a gimmick that takes advantage of Skill Drain's negation effect, or it's used in side decks that after games 2 and 3, when you go first, you can do whatever you want, and then you set Skill Drain, and all of a sudden your opponent like can't play the game. Skill Drain has a lot of really cool, unique applications. So, for instance, where it says negate the effects of all face-up monsters while they're face-up on the field, there are some cards, hypothetically, that tribute themselves for cost from the field, and then when the effect is resolving, since they're no longer on the field, Skill Drain actually doesn't negate it. So it's a way to like get around Skill Drain, which is kind of cool. Activate the effect of a monster, and let's say you have another spell card that's a quick play spell that can, say, destroy that monster. When the chain resolves, the spell card will destroy the monster, and the monster's effect will actually resolve, since, again, it's no longer on the field.
Something.
So there's some cool little tricks with Skill Drain. Also, there are some cards that, like, say, oh, this card, if you normal summon it, it only has 1,000 attack points, but its default attack points might be 3,000. Skill Drain will just negate that effect, so now you can just normal summon 3,000 attack point guys for free. not as relevant in modern Yu-Gi-Oh, but for older Yu-Gi-Oh, there was what were called skill drain beatdown decks that would just play these giant idiots, and then because skill drain's out, they're 3,000 attack, and your opponent can't use monster effects to fight them back, so if they don't have good spell and trap removal, they're just going to get run over by all these giant things that weren't really meant to be used in that way. So skill drain does enable a lot of really cool strategies, but for the most part, it's typically only used for oppressive things, and it's a card that people really go back and forth on it. People feel that sometimes, like, oh yeah, skill drain's a fine card to be in 3, like, no one's really playing it, and then they'll put it to 3, and then everyone's like, fuck this card, skill drain sucks, like, I can't believe I'm losing to this, because this card's so toxic. It's a very polarizing card, but it's still, like, in terms of, like, as the most oppressive thing you could be doing, I wouldn't say this is it. I would say it's, like, up there, but there's definitely worse things you could be doing. But skill drain was definitely one of, like, the first floodgates in Yu-Gi-Oh! And has a very lasting impression on the game, I would say.
Okay, interesting.
Why are you
Speaking of newer cards, this is actually a newer card. Let's see what you think about this one.
Dimension Shifter. You have no cards in your graveyard. Quick effect, you can send this card from your hand to the graveyard. Until the end of next turn, any cards in the graveyard is banished instead. And that means your opponent's graveyard as well?
Yes, any graveyard.
And quick effect means you can use this on your opponent's turn?
Correct.
Oh my god. Pretty good. You can send this to your hand to the graveyard. Then next turn, any card sent to the graveyard is banished. So this means that this card is also banished.
No, this will go to the graveyard, and then after that resolves, anything for your turn, or anything during that turn, and then the turn after will be banished.
Oh my god, what the fuck? That's awful. You know, obviously, like, you play enough card games, and I think this is probably a phrasing in Yu-Gi-Oh! Like, attack cards, where it's like, you use attack card to beat a strategy, and, like, you're literally putting that card into your deck to hopefully beat that strategy. This is, like, the tech card that beats, like, every strategy. Because, like, I feel like the graveyard is so important here, and, like, it's like the reverse Maxi in a sense, where, like, you're not drawing any cards, but you're basically stopping your opponent from having more cards. Like, sure. I feel like this is... Because I'm thinking of it from the Soul deck. If you did this to me, I feel like half the deck is like not even usable anymore, if not more. So like I feel like I'm in a really bad spot if you play Shifter. I didn't see this card once, which makes me think it's banned. Like why wouldn't anyone play this? Like it feels like it's so good. And that's my logic.
I like how your like 40 games on Master Duel is determining whether or not I haven't seen it in like 40 games going to Diamond. You know, must not be good for those fans.
I feel like in Yu-Gi-Oh! Especially, like you'd see the really good cards often, right?
That's fair. That's fair.
Like, but Maxi is so egregious. Like it is warped perspective of like what a good card is. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, that might be a hard bar to clear, to be fair. So maybe don't compare everything directly to Maxi.
I almost wish I didn't know Maxi existed, you know? Like, I feel like it...
I think we all feel that way, Rare. We all feel that way.
I feel like it's really fucked my Yu-Gi-Oh! Like, perspective of... Like, is it not good? Anyways, I feel like this card is good. I'm just trying to think of, like, okay, you run this card against some strategy. There's enough strategies in this. Like, Snake Eyes is, like, popping right now, right? I feel like this card... just absolutely ruins that deck, right? From what I remember. Like, I feel like a lot of the stuff happened with the graveyard. I could be completely wrong in misremembering, but I feel like this would just roll that. Like, you could do this on your turn. So, like, they try to do their strategy, and it's like, okay, if they play a card, and it's like, send another card to the graveyard, you would play that when that card is activated, so the chain would work that this would go off first, and then their effect would go off.
Correct.
So then, therefore, that their minion does not go into the graveyard.
Correct.
So... based on that logic, I feel like this card's very good. Like, I couldn't imagine it not being very good. And you know what? I'm going to probably say it's banned.
Final answer?
Final answer.
So you mentioned how you've never seen this card being played.
Yeah. Is that right? Is that right? Is that right?
So, I don't recall, like, when you exactly played and, like, what decks you were facing against. So, because, like, I'm going to take a guess here. I don't think Sword Soul was the meta deck to be playing when you were on your Yu-Gi-Oh!
So, the only reason Sword Soul happened was because... when I messaged Farfa, he told me that they're doing, like, a free deck for it. So I was like...
and it's also just an easy, like, I don't want to say easy, it's a fairly linear deck, all things considered, in terms of the combo.
For sure.
So, like I said, I'm not sure what other decks you were playing against frequently, so that could, like, possibly distort whether or not you think Dimension Shifter is good or not. Because if the meta was playing a bunch of decks where Shifter isn't necessarily good, then maybe people aren't playing it, right? But Shifter's interesting because when it was first released, it was released as a promo card alongside two other really powerful cards, Dark Ruler No More and Nibiru the Primal Being. You might be familiar with either of those. Dimension Shifter was the worst of those three released by far. It was just not even close. People looked at it and they're like, this card, like, Nibiru's insane, Dark Ruler's insane, Dimension Shifter sucks. Like, why is this, like, one of the cards they printed? This was, like, a card that the TCG exclusively made to try to combat decks for, like, going first and to try to, like, punish them to, like, rein the power of decks in line. As time went on, and as decks got even crazier, and especially as Graveyard Reliance became more and more prolific, Dimension Shifter started to make its way into players' decks. Now, the problem with Dimension Shifter is that if you are playing a graveyard-based deck yourself, you can't really play Dimension Shifter because Dimension Shifter also works during your turn. It is when it's activated, it works for that turn, but then also works for the next turn as well, which is kind of frustrating. You need to play Dimension Shifter in a particular deck in order to take full advantage of it. You basically need to be playing a deck that doesn't care about the graveyard, or you're playing like a straight up just stun anti-meta strategy that like you just want to make sure they just never get to play the game. And so throughout many of formats, Snake Eyes you mentioned is a very popular one now especially. Tier Element before was also very popular. Dimension Shifter saw its place in several decks that were just anti-meta towards what the best decks were. Now it's gotten to the point that Dimension Shifter, people are so sick of it, especially in a meta that is like 90% Snake Eyes, that people are calling out for this card to be banned because it's one of those cards that if you're going first as a Snake Eye player or a player playing a graveyard-based deck and your opponent just Dimension Shifters you just lose the game. Like, there's like barely any counterplay to it. If they open the Shifter, you can't play because everything requires you to actually have the graveyard, so it just turns a game into a non-game, and then you would just pass the turn and your opponent just kills you. So, very toxic card. A card that people are crying out to be banned, but is currently not banned, and people are hoping on the upcoming ban list that it does get banned, because people are very sick of it.
Okay. I was like, you can see from my perspective, I was kind of like preemptively cheering because it sounded like I was right. But I like.
And you were!
Well, I thought it was banned, so I like.
Oh, you think it was banned? Oh, never mind. Okay, so you didn't get that part right.
I slowly started to put my hands back down. I'm not exactly banned anymore, guys. But, I mean, it makes sense. The card is like, a lot of cards in Yu-Gi-Oh! Almost feel like they're just waiting for like a critical mass or something to happen, and then they just become the greatest card on the planet, right?
Yeah, some people are making the argument that if there were more decks that interacted with the Banish pile, that Dimension Shifter wouldn't be as bad, but I think in the context of like this specific metagame and the past metas that we've had, you know, for the past several months and years, Dimension Shifter just shits on all of them. But the thing is, you're not going to play Dimension Shifter in every deck because it is a bit limiting in the fact that it hurts you as well. You either have to be playing the deck that can play it, or you just don't play it.
But here's a counter argument. This is the first time where I think this card is actually necessary, because I feel like every time I go to Farfa stream or something, everyone's yelling about Snake Eyes being fucking broken and it needs to be removed, because I feel like it's still like a really good deck, right? Isn't it good that a card like this exists to force people to play something else? Even though it does affect the graveyard on your side, like, I feel like to innovate a new strategy in Yu-Gi-Oh! So it's not only Snake Eyes, isn't this like a necessary evil to have in the game?
I think the problem that most people have, I would agree with you, but I think the problem is this is not the type of interaction that people want, because while yes, Dimension Shifter does combat Snake Eyes and other graveyard-based decks, I think people want solutions that aren't just, oh, you just turn skip your opponent. I think people want something where, and this is also partially a Snake Eyes problem, where it's people want the decks to be interactive with each other, not just, oh, I'm going to play this Floodgate or this toxic card so that you just get to pass your turn and then I just win as a result of drawing this card, right? Like, that's not really fun that if you think about it, you both draw your opening 5 cards, oh, look, I have Dimension Shifter, I win the game. Like, and you can argue, like, okay, as someone who's playing Snake Eye, like, you should have something to combat that, but it's worse because it's not something that's in every deck. It's only going to be in the decks that aren't specifically being played to counter it, and so it's frustrating because there's no other solution other than make sure they just can't play the game at all. People want to have, like, the interactive back and forth of playing the game without it just being like, oh, did I draw my Floodgate to just auto-win the game, essentially.
I guess that perspective makes sense, but I feel like at this point it's almost impossible to design a card like that in Yu-Gi-Oh!
You would think that, but there have been a few formats recently that have shown that it's possible, And Yu-Gi-Oh! is slowly starting to, or rather, Konami is slowly starting to put a lot of these types of floodgate cards on the ban list to like prevent that type of play style from being the way to combat these decks. So, like, for instance, there was the format not too long ago with like Rescue Ace and a few other strategies. That was like a really interactive format, but then also Tier Element format, even though that was like the best deck by a mile, it was a super interactive format that people absolutely loved. So it really just depends on the decks themselves and what they're able to do, but then also like what those answers are. And Yu-Gi-Oh! Just has a lot, like Skill Drain and Kaiser Coliseum are really old cards. Shifter isn't that old. So like they obviously printed this to curb that power, but it's like not in a way that is healthy and interactive. It's like, oh, I'm going to draw my silver bullet and win the game immediately. Like, fun and skill.
Okay, I can get that perspective. Okay, yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Like, for instance, I believe it was the European World Championship qualifier that just took place. The final match, it was Snake Eye versus a guy playing a Dimension Shifter deck. It was game 3. The guy who was playing the Dimension Shifter deck opened Dimension Shifter and just won the game as a result. It was over. Like, the other guy just lost because he can't play through Dimension Shifter. So that was it. And it was like, great, fun game 3. Like, that was for going to the World Championship, right?
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
Woo, fun and interactive.
So that is the unfortunate reality of what like tech cards do to the game, though, right? This one's probably ubiquitous enough to like be a problem, but I've noticed in like every card game, right? Like if I run a card that destroys your weapon in Hearthstone and your whole deck's built around a weapon, like you just got fogged. Like, you're not going to feel good about that regardless.
I do not envy game designers trying to, like, figure out solutions to these problems, because I feel like it's just going to create more problems as a result.
Yeah, it's also, like, the argument... I actually had this discussion a lot with other Hearthstone players. It's like, because we don't get to interact on our opponent's turn, is it more important for the card game to have more fun for the person playing the card, or is it equally as important to make sure the opponent who's receiving the card... not receiving the card, but like playing against the person playing the card to have as much fun, or like a somewhat of fun enjoyment, right? But I think that the problem with card games is like your opponent's playing cards. It's like you're not gonna have fun regardless. Like, just go fuck yourself. Like, stop playing.
Yeah.
So I don't know. It's Yu-Gi-Oh! Has a huge problem where it's like there's so many cards in this game that above all else, Dimension Shifter might be a necessary evil. But I understand how frustrating it is to lose from like a card that just ruins your whole game plan. I was gonna say, you take it a step further, you 5D chess it, and you go like, well, if they think I'm gonna run Snake Eyes, so they're gonna run Shifter, I'm just gonna play a deck that doesn't work for the graveyard, then I'm gonna go fuck them. How good is that deck, right? Like, maybe there needs to be that eventual like next level deck that doesn't use the graveyard as often. That's like game design on the highest level, which I don't even know.
Right.
I was thinking about that.
Well, that's actually like what happened with MBT when he went to the North American World Championship qualifier. He was playing Snake Eye, which is and by far and away the best deck. Like, it's like if you're not playing Snake Eye, you're actually just shooting yourself in the foot. And the problem is, the people who were playing Snake Eye were playing shifter decks or anti-meta decks with some other toxic cards we may or may not see in this video. And he ran into 3 or 4 of those decks in a row, and these decks are literally designed to beat his, but against any other deck, those decks will lose 10 times out of 10. And so, like, is that fun? I think that's something that's debatable, right? Like, do you credit the anti-meta people for making that sort of meta call that they're only going to play Snake Eye for 14 rounds? Or is I don't know. I think we can do a whole video about this. I think there's a discussion to be had here.
It's like Snake Eyes, that's the problem. Like, maybe
no, exactly. I think it's on both ends, right? I think it's the answers to these types of decks are necessary, but like too impressive. But also the deck designs themselves warrant people to play these cards to even have a chance if they're not playing that bad deck.
So like,
right? So it solve both sides of it.
No, but so it's interesting. Like, is Dimension Shifter a toxic card because it answers the best deck in the game and it needs to be in the game? Like, that's how it feels like you're explaining it to me. Like, even though that may not be the case, it is a necessary evil if Snake Eyes ends up being the best deck by a mile. Like, you need a card like this in the game. Like, stop your opponent from playing Snake Eyes. It comes to the other conversation of this is like, is this card actually a problem if a deck like Snake Eyes, which is like leagues above everything else, doesn't exist anymore? Like, then it becomes, is this card actually as toxic as you're making it seem, or at least the community makes it seem? It's like an infinite loop of conversation of like, right, does it actually feel bad, or is it like, do you need this card to exist in order for Snake Eyes to just not be the most egregious deck on the planet?
I think the other problem is that there isn't any counterplay to Dimension Shifter. The only card that stops Dimension Shifter is Called by the Grave, and I'm pretty sure that's limited to 1 copy. And Dimension Shifter...
Oh, Called by the Grave is good. Yeah, that's a good card.
Right, so like I think that is the only card, unless you're playing Crossout Designator and putting a Dimension Shifter in your deck to also answer that. There is basically like one or two specific counters to this card that there isn't really anything that the player who is playing the best deck has to answer said card. And, like, do you just say that's a skill issue? Like, that's what you get for not playing it? Like, the conversation could go on and on. But I think especially because there's no way to interact with it on top of it, there's not really much you can do about it.
They need, like, another card to answer the shifter, is what you're saying. So, like, you can
Exactly.
counter the shifter if they go for the shifter. Okay, yeah, for sure.
Right. Yeah, Call by the Grave is limited, so you would have to have one Called by the Grave in your hand, the only one in your deck, and they have 3 Dimension Shifter that they can draw on the first turn. Already the odds aren't in your favor as a result of that. But then you could argue that Call by the Grave is a toxic card because it stops the dimension. We could keep going. But we need to move on. We spent probably half of this video talking about Dimension Shifter, but I think it warrants a good discussion.
Yeah,
Okay.
card game design is hard.
Well, especially over 25 years. Yeah. Anyway, here's your next card.
Stumbling. Yeah, that's what we were just doing. Monster that is normal summon, flip summon, or special summon is changed to defense position. I think the art of this card is incredible.
It's cool. Yeah, it's great.
That
Old Yu-Gi-Oh! Art hits way better.
Like, I think this is the first time in Yu-Gi-Oh! History that the flavor of this card is really well thought out. For, you know, the effect. Like, it's actually really sick. This is a weird question, or a weird card in that I don't know how much being in defense position really changes a lot of, like, modern cards. I mean, maybe, like, in combat it makes it significantly worse. Like, I'm trying to think, like, Baron, like, for example, like, did it really matter as in defense position? Like, I still get to use the effect.
It effectively gives everything summoning sickness, if you want to look at it that way.
Oh, I guess that's fair. I gotta think about it like that. Yeah, because if you're going
Because Yu-Gi-Oh! Doesn't have summoning sickness. Yu-Gi-Oh! You can play the monster immediately and attack with it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Like, I gotta remember that because, like, in Magic it has summoning sickness unless it has, like, haste.
I'm pretty sure Yu-Gi-Oh! is like one of the only games that doesn't have summoning sickness.
Yeah, I think Pokemon actually, like, if you go first you can't attack, but then second player doesn't have summoning sickness for their Pokemon, but you have to start with the Pokemon on the field, so I guess, like, it's not really summoning sickness whatsoever. This card's interesting. I don't know how good this is in truly modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Though. But if like, based on when this card was printed, it seems like it's somewhat recent unless this is a reprint.
This card is pretty old. This card, I think, might be older than... No, it's newer than Skill Drain and Kaiser Glider, but it's older by far than Dimension Shift.
Because I guess it would stop people from attacking, which could be really relevant. That's fucking crazy. So you would play this when your opponent starts to, like, pop off and be like, haha, no, I get my turn again, you idiot. That's interesting. Like, I'm just imagining someone, like, putting their thumb up and, like, doing, like no, like, you gotta wait one more
Not
time.
today! Ah!
Which seems like a pretty good card if I think of it out loud. Because, like, if the card read, like, oh, you get an extra turn, that's pretty good. Like, in a game like Yu-Gi-Oh! Like, that seems very relevant. Now, bigger question is, you get to use a lot of your monster's effects even if they're in defense position. So I'm thinking like Sword Soul here. Like, you often build the board so your opponent just couldn't do anything, and then you just break whatever they're doing. So, like, does defense position... If all of my monsters are in defense position, does that truly matter? Yeah, I can't attack that turn, but then I'm stopping you from having your turn virtually because my board's already built. In older Yu-Gi-Oh! This probably slapped ass, if I'll be honest. But, like, I don't know. I can see it, though. I want it to be good. But I don't think it's good. And I'm going to say it's not, and I'm also going to say it's not banned, obviously, if I don't think it's good.
Final answer.
Yeah, I'm hoping you tell me this is good, though. This is a cool card.
I didn't think you were going to actually just love this card as much as you did, nor discuss it as long. You're correct, though. This card is bad. It's never been banned. In very old Yu-Gi-Oh!, there were some decks, very few, that would actually play this card, and it was like a nuisance, but it wasn't like, oh, this card is going to just win me the game because I'm playing it. No. It was just a card that some decks would play if they were playing like a burn deck or some sort of stall or mill deck, just to have a way to slow the opponent down from killing them, because older Yu-Gi-Oh! Was very combat-centric. But you figured out that by newer Yu-Gi-Oh! Standards, like, everything can still use its effects in defense position. It doesn't really matter all that much. It's like... It's not the worst card ever printed, obviously. Like, it's fine. It has a home in some old Yu-Gi-Oh! Decks, and it had a place back then. This card was rarely ever seen. Like, maybe on the playground at most, but that was, like, about it. But cool art! I mean, it's got cool art. That's one thing it's got going for it.
It is. I fucking love it, to be honest. I think it's really cool. What monster is that? Is it like another...
That is Gaga Gigo. Do you want to see Gaga Gigo?
Now that you say the name, absolutely. What's that? What
There's Goblin Kiko. There's lore behind this. He's in multiple artworks. He's kind of cool looking. He's also not bad. He's an 1850 normal summon, which for old Yu-Gi-Oh is like okay.
He's the OG. Okay, I got you.
Yeah, he's kind of cool. He's a cool little guy. All right, let's show you your next card.
Scrap Iron Scarecrow. When an opponent's monster declares an attack, target the attacking monster, and then negate the attack. Also, after that, set this face down instead of sending it to the graveyard. Oh, so this is like infinite. Is that what that means? Like, you just keep... What the fuck?
Remember, if a trap card is set, it cannot be used the turn that it is set. So keep that in mind.
Oh, so it's once per turn. It's once per turn. Okay. Why are you laughing?
Your reaction to this card initially. It's infinite? I mean, it's still technically infinite. It's just not as infinite as you thought it was.
Yeah, so, again, this is like one of the cases like where I think an older Yu-Gi-Oh! Might actually be really good. Because even if you're blocking, like, if they have a Blue Eyes and they have some other shit or whatever, like, yeah, they're attacking with their, like, little dude, but, like, if I'm stopping Blue Eyes from playing the game the whole time, they went through all that effort for nothing. In reality, does it ever really work like that? You show me enough cards where you can break this card, and even if they do it once, you now know it's there, so it's like, whatever, like, you can play around it. I guess you can. I guess it's going to delay the game like an older Yu-Gi-Oh! But, like, in current Yu-Gi-Oh!, like, there's no fucking way this card's being played. There's no way. But let me... negate the attack? If there's, like, a minion that goes... when this attacks, this effect happens, and then you negate that attack. Does that effect still proc? I don't know if there actually is an effect like that in...
There are. I think it just depends on how the card is worded. So I will say yes, but it depends.
Because, like, Hearthstone has, like, when this attacks, do this effect. And
so there are some cards that say, like, if this card attacks at the end of the damage step, and since they never got to the damage step since the attack got negated by Scarecrow, like, that effect would activate. But if it's just, like, if this card attacks, probably you'd be able to activate it before Scrap Iron Scarecrow can actually be used. So I think it just depends on the card, to be honest.
I mean, this can't be good. Surely this is... I'm just trying to, like, walk my brain around and see if I can think of anything else that would make this card playable. In modern Yu-Gi-Oh!, I seriously doubt this is playable, so I have to go with, like, it's not good, it's not bad.
Final answer.
Yeah, okay. Based on that, you're gonna be like, yeah, well, fuck yeah, this card's broken, let's go. That's my final answer. It's not good. I don't think
Scrap Iron Scarecrow is very funny. So recently, Scrap Iron Scarecrow actually started seeing some playability in Edison format, of all things. You're slightly familiar with Edison from one of our first videos. People started realizing that Edison format is actually slow enough that a card like Scrap Iron Scarecrow is actually, like, playable and actually okay, depending on the deck that you're playing. There's also not enough spell and trap removal in Edison that sometimes that the Scarecrow can actually put in a lot of work. So then, modern players took note of that and started looking at Scrap Iron Scarecrow and thinking, wait a minute, we can actually take advantage of this too. And then they never did because the card sucks and it's bad. You're correct. I didn't take you on the roller coaster. I was
thinking about the pop-up list. When you start thinking of a sentence with Edison, this card seeing play, like, somewhat, like, I'm like, okay, this is the way this card's going.
To be fair, there are some cards in Edison that still see play, actually, which is kind of unbelievable if you think about it.
Fair enough. Alright. Should be some good cards, right? Like, Metamorphosis or whatever, wasn't that from there?
That was not legal with Edison.
Oh, no. It's like...
But there's a card that's called Allure of Darkness, for instance. All it says is draw 2 cards, then banish a dark monster from your hand. That still sees play in modern Yu-Gi-Oh!
What if you don't have a dark monster in hand?
You have to discard your whole hand. You're playing in a deck that's all darks, like you're never going to miss. And also, it was limited in that format. I think now Allure of Darkness is actually legal in 3 copies, which is crazy to think about. Yeah, it's a cool card. Alright, speaking of cool cards, what do you think about this guy?
Holy fuck, that's a lot of text.
Yeah, sorry, he's got a lot of text. And actually, unfortunately, it's all relevant, too, so I can't tell you to, like...
Dude, look at his name. They have to, like, crunch it together to make sure it fits.
Oh, there's worse cards than that.
Just in case anyone's curious, this is the true Rocco.
The true. Well, there is the Draco Slaying King, and then there's the true Draco Slaying King.
Masterpiece? The true Draco Slaying King. Look at this guy. Holy shit.
He's pretty cool, right? His art's insane.
His art's makes a different background to make him pop more, dude. What the hell? You're not doing justice. Where is this guy? Is he in the fucking... Is this heaven?
He's in the void.
Alright. To contribute some of this card face up, you contribute newest spells / trap cards you control. You could okay, only one, I guess. You contribute a continuous spell / trap card you control, as well as monsters.
You can attribute any combination, just for clarification.
That is very interesting. I don't think I've ever seen a card that can use like traps like that or spells like those.
So this archetype, that's one of their gimmicks, is that they contribute any continuous spell, continuous trap, or monster for its tributes.
That's kind of cool. Okay.
It's neat. It's cool. Yeah, keep going.
Unaffected by the effects of cards with the same card type. Monster, spell, and or trap as the original card type of the cards. Oh my god, that's fucking sick! Like, depending on what you use to sacrifice this, like, it doesn't get affected by those cards.
Correct.
You need two of the three?
It's a 2 tribute, yes.
Ooh, okay. Once per turn, during either player's turn, if you control a tribute summon monster, you can banish one continuous spell / trap card from your graveyard, then target one other card on the field and destroy it. Wow, okay. That means you're guaranteed at least one banish. Because you're at least using a spell or a trap to do this. That's such an interesting design card. Spell and or trap. It has to be continuous. Like it has to be like one of those aura cards you showed me earlier, like Stumbling.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, but I will say that for this archetype, they have their own archetype-specific continuous spells and traps that you would play in this deck. So you can tribute like Stumbling or some of the other cards you've seen, but it has its own cards for the archetype as well.
Okay. I mean, this card's cooking though. I'll tell you what, that's pretty sick. Oh my god, I don't even know how to really evaluate that because I really like how this card gives you the choice of like what you actually need to play against. Like, if I'm going against Sword Soul, right, like, yeah, I could do just, like, maybe Spell and Monster, like, I just hope they don't have, like, I think there's, like, one drop card that actually deals with this, I forget what it's called.
Yeah, Blackout.
Yeah, so, like, as long as they don't have that, it's like, okay, I'm chilling. I do like the concept of, like, picking what you want to sacrifice. Now, the question is, how good is this actually? You get to banish a card. Wait, so you get to target one that's been destroyed. So the card that you destroy is sent to the graveyard, right? You don't have to banish it?
You don't banish it, no. It just goes to grave.
Once per turn. It's not a quick effect either?
It is a quick effect. It says once per turn during either player's turn. This is before they standardized using quick effect to show can be used during either player's turn not long after Masterpiece was printed. So some cards still say once per turn during either player's turn.
I think this. Oh my god, that makes me think this card's pretty great. But I mean, how likely are you to have? I'm guessing. You said they built like an archetype for this.
Yeah, I mean, it's similar to how like Hearthstone has classes, and Sword Soul, right? I mean, Yu-Gi-Oh has a myriad of different archetypes. So the Draco Slayer archetype, yes, they do have continuous spells and traps that benefit the archetype.
Yeah, I'm just trying to really think, like, how likely are you to have, like, enough spells and trap cards for you to, like, really get a payoff for this? I'm guessing even if you hit one, though, it's fine. I don't even know. Is Baron banned yet?
Yes, actually.
Wow.
Not in Master Duel, but in the TCG. I don't know about the OCG, but in TCG, Baron is banned.
Now, Baron was really good because you just stop, like, one card, as far as I remember. It's also got, like, a decent body, but for the most part, for what I remember, it was just, like, to stop your opponent from playing, like, a card. This is, like, the same effect, right? I imagine, like, for one, it's basically what Baron did, just, like, you have to do it slightly different, correct? Just so I understand what it actually looks like.
Yeah, it's not a negation, which is relevant. I mean, it's just destroying a card. So, like, if your opponent's using an effect, you won't be able to stop the effect from resolving. But you'll be able to destroy something, for instance. Where Baron would negate and destroy. So there's two differences there.
Baron's effect is just objectively better. Is like from what I'm understanding. If you're going to use this once, like negating and banishing a card is like infinitely better than just banishing.
Well, I think it depends because Baron, if I recall, only gets that negation effect once while it's on the field.
No, which is 100% correct. I believe it only got one. But what I mean is, like, if I'm only doing one effect from Masterpiece, I would rather have Baron's effect, like, almost every single time.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
If I'm only doing it once.
I think it is really dependent on the context of the board, because Masterpiece is a bit more proactive, because with Baron also has the effect to target a card on the field and destroy it, if you recall. It has two effects, so, I mean, it also has the same effect as Masterpiece. So, like, the negation effect is more reactive, where the popping effect is more proactive. But Baron's pop effect, if I recall correctly, is not a quick effect. I'm pretty sure that has to be used at ignition speed.
Really gauge how good this effect is. I think it's good. It's just like, is it bannable? That's where I'm really like. I'm gonna ask one more question for this archetype. Is there like a continuous spell or trap card that really benefits if it's from The banish or the banish zone, I guess is what you call it.
Like when you're tributing for Masterpiece, is that what you're asking?
No, so like it says you can banish one continuous spell and trap card from your graveyard. Are there trap cards and continuous spells that are very good if they're banished? Is that ever a card? Is that ever an effect like Yu-Gi-Oh? So like for instance, like if I banish a particular spell, it gets like another benefit for banishing that card.
I understand what you're asking. For the purposes of this, the continuous spells and traps that work with this archetype, they gain an effect when they are sent to the graveyard. Not necessarily just for a tribute summon, but just period. If they're sent to the graveyard, they do something. So nothing with Masterpiece banishing it triggers it, but when Masterpiece uses them to tribute summon himself, there are cards in the archetype that will gain an effect as a result of that.
Man,
So it's yes, but in a different way than you're thinking.
this is tough. This is really tough. I feel like it really depends on what these spells or trap cards are. I feel like the effect is good, but like, is it at a level to be banned? I'm not really sure. But I think the cards.
I will let you know for the purpose of this, the spells and traps are irrelevant. Like, they're good, but they are not... You can analyze this card in a vacuum, which is why I picked it.
If you're going to say that, then I will say this card was probably pretty good, and it was probably banned. There are Hearthstone cards that, in a vacuum, like, they are good, but they've gotten better with, like, contextual elements to it, so that's why I'm asking.
Sure.
And if you're asking if a card is banned, like, I feel like it has to be past that threshold of just, like, it's playable. In a vacuum, I'll say this card's good and banned.
Final answer?
Final answer.
Oh, Masterpiece. Masterpiece, Masterpiece, Masterpiece. Where do we start with this card? You're correct. I guess I sort of gave it away when I said that about being able to analyze this in a vacuum. But Masterpiece, oh, fuck this card, dude. So many people are so happy that this card is banned. So the reason why this card is so oppressive is just the first part of the effect. The fact that whenever you tribute, it's going to be immune to those types of effects. And the thing is, especially with modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Does not really play trap cards. Like, let's be honest. The only real trap cards you're playing are, like, infinite impermanence, evenly matched, let's say, and then if you're playing, like, a trap-based deck, then you're going to have traps in your deck. So most of the time, with Masterpiece, if you contribute it with a monster plus a spell card, and have it have monster spell immunity, it's going to basically be unoutable from your opponent. Your opponent will literally just not have an answer to this card. The only real counterplay to Masterpiece, aside from the third wedge of like what it's not immune to, you being able to like handle it that way, if your deck doesn't have a way to deal with it in that sense, there are cards that you may or may not be familiar with called Kaijus. What Kaijus are is that they're a monster that you can tribute an opponent's monster and give them that monster in its place. And so that's not a monster effect, that's a way to summon it to the field. So by using a Kaiju to tribute over their Masterpiece, that is how you'd have to out it, but you'd have to like draw the Kaiju to be able to out Masterpiece. Not to mention, it has the quick effect to pop something during every single turn, which is even more annoying because if you do have a way to out it, let's say it's monster spell immune and you have a trap card, you set the trap card face down, end phase, I'm going to activate Masterpiece, pop the trap card, now you can't use it. So, incredibly frustrating card to play against. It's just so, like, during its time, it was, oh my god, I'm having flashbacks just talking about it. This card is so fucking irritating to play against. Like, every time you see it, it's like, it was one of the best decks you could be playing, and they played it with other archetypes as well. It wasn't just played only in the Draco Slaying archetype, but man, this card is just, oh my god, this card's irritating.
So when I played, you're speaking about like the kaijus. When I played Master Duel, I forget what monster my chat was saying, but I think it's like if I have like 5 monsters on my side of the board or something, it can sacrifice all of them and play a minion. Am I thinking of the right monster? You know what I'm talking about?
I know there's one that does 3. The Kaiju just does 1. There's one that does 2, and there's one that does 3. I'm not sure about 5. Though.
Okay, maybe it was 3 then. I honestly can't remember because my chat would just be like, wait for it. Like, I don't think it ever happened, but I remember them being like, oh, you should play around this. I'm like, dude, I'm not playing around this fucking card.
On top of it, too, with Masterpiece, so the cards that it would, like, send to the graveyard that are in Archetype, they'd have an effect, like, when this card's sent to the graveyard, like, destroy a spell or trap on the field, or destroy a monster on the field. So you got even more value for using those cards to tribute summon out Masterpiece. Also, they had abilities where you would do your normal summon for the turn, and then the spell card, for instance, would say, you can tribute summon a Draco Slayer monster in addition to your normal summon for this turn. So you could go like normal summon a monster, play the spell, and then activate the spell to tribute the monster and the spell to summon Masterpiece, and then use the effect to pop a back row, and then banish the card you just sent with Masterpiece to pop another card. And you can just see this card is so obnoxious.
It's pretty good.
This was 2017. This is actually somewhat recent. And it did not last very long, as you can imagine.
Yeah, it's gotta feel really bad from a card designer perspective to be like, oh, this card's so fucking sick. And then like, they're like, oh shit, we gotta ban it boys for the week.
Might be familiar with this.
Super Polymerization. Discard one card. Fusion summon one monster from your extra deck using monsters from the field as fusion material. Either player can activate or effects in response to this card's activation. So you're just saying, like, you can use your opponent's monster to special summon something. This is the same thing. Discard one card. Just summon a fusion monster from your extra deck using monsters on their field as fusion material. So you don't even have to use monsters on your side. They just have enough, like, you're just chilling.
It says either field.
That's fucked up. That is, and you can't even respond to it. That's like this is like this is a fucking this is awful. I couldn't imagine how frustrated I would be to just get this card played against me. There's no way this card is still weak. I'm gonna go with this. This is such a bad design of a. Please tell me.
Violence.
That's fun. That's horrific. That's especially if you like
It's still going. I hate to tell you, but this card is not banned. It is at 3 copies.
Really? Does it get plays?
I think it's actually maybe semi-limited OCG. So, Super Polymerization is a very old card. It's a card that was printed, I want to say, like 2006, 2007. And the thing is, this is when fusion summoning was really bad. Like, there was no good fusion-based archetypes like there are nowadays. And so, this was sort of a card to maybe help you fusion summon, right? Because if your opponent can't respond, maybe that's your big way to win the game. Cool. Like, that's your big payoff, essentially. You wouldn't be using your opponent's monsters, it'd be for your own fusion monsters. As Yu-Gi-Oh! Progressed, they started printing monsters that had very generic requirements. So it would say, like, 2 monsters of the same type, or 2 monsters of the same attribute, or some just say 2 monsters, and, like, that's it, right?
Okay.
Super Polymerization all of a sudden started getting better and better. Then people started to believe that Konami specifically printed fusion monsters that were Super Poly targets so that people could use Super Polymerization reactively into the opponent's board. And Super Polymerization is actually considered to be quite a strong card for decks that can support it, because if your opponent puts up a board of like 4, 5, 6, 7 negates, Super Polymerization is actually one of the few cards that can make it so that your opponent can't respond to it, which doesn't sound healthy, but if your opponent goes first and sets up a complete board uninterrupted, that's not necessarily healthy either. So Super Poly is like a good board-breaking, equalizing type card to give you a fighting chance in that game. But the fact that you can just only use your opponent's monsters to then, like, summon your own thing, and the fact that, I think the biggest issue, I don't think any card-to-card game should say, neither player can activate cards or effects in response to this card's activation. That is just not okay. But for Yu-Gi-Oh! It's kind of weird because it sort of fills this niche of dimension shifter, board-breaking type card where it's like, it gives you a fighting chance if you aren't going first in a particular game. And let's say you don't open Maxi or you don't open other hand traps, this is a card that gets you back in the game. Now the problem is, again, if your board gets super polyed and they have it and you have no way to respond to it, similar to Dimension Shifter, just feels like shit because now, like, you just lost the game because you got super polyed. So it's a really unhealthy card, but it's not something that I would say it's toxic, but it's not like the most toxic thing ever. It does come with a lot of concessions. You do have to discard a card. You do have to be playing the monsters in your extra deck to be able to summon off of Super Poly. So there's a lot of things you have to take into consideration when playing a card like this. But there's plenty of clips out there of people getting their entire board Super Polyed and just crying over it because it's just unfair. As Yu-Gi-Oh! Got older, this card got a lot better.
Yeah, it's also like a really emotionally pocket card, right? That's crazy. I can't believe this isn't banned, actually. That's wild.
I think because of the fact that neither player could respond is the worst part about this. I don't necessarily think using your opponent's monsters only is the bad part. I think that's okay. I think it's just the fact that you can't do anything about it is the worst part.
Yeah, that's miserable. I'm actually very surprised it's not, like, even to limit it to one copy, like, that just seems... It's not even, like, a power level thing, it's, like, a game design thing.
Yeah.
So that's why I'm more surprised. Like, I feel like Yu-Gi-Oh! Would have to, like, look at this card and be like, do we really want this in our game?
I will say one of the interesting elements when it comes to playing Yu-Gi-Oh! Is that people will specifically, if Super Poly is considered to be a good board-breaking card, people will look and say, can we build a board that we're going to make going first that is immune to getting super polyed? And that is something that people have to consider, like, when they're formulating their combos and such. There's been plenty of times where it's like, this card is good, but if you can make a board that plays around it, now all of a sudden Super Polymerization is a dead card in their hand.
Yeah, I guess that's fair. Okay, there is, like, you can play around it, kind of. But it's...
Kind of.
Yeah. It's the same case of, like, if this card techs against your deck, like, you're blocked.
What about this card?
This gives me flashbacks to when I was younger as well.
It's a very old card. It's a very old card.
The art. Imperial Order. Negate all spell effects on the field. Once per turn during the standby phase, you may pay 700 life points. This is not optional, by the way. You must pay 700 life points, my bad. Or this card is destroyed. Wow, negate all spell effects on the field. Okay, so you're gonna have to clarify something for me. Let's say you play a spell that's not like an aura. I'm gonna call them auras because that's what I'm calling Hearthstone. Like if it has like a continuous effect, it's an aura. So if you play a spell that has an aura, flip this card. That a spell does not work anymore.
Correct.
And if they play a spell that is like a one-time thing, I don't know if we really have an example. So I was gonna say like polymerization, but like it doesn't really work.
Like Pot of Greed.
Yeah, like Pot of Greed. Like, you put that on the board, then you flip this. Does Pot of Greed still go through?
No.
Okay, so this actually is like a global counter spell.
For spells.
For spells, not trap cards. I gotta make that. Okay. Wow. To have a full counter spell for spells, and you only pay 700 life points per turn, and that means they would have to have what a trap card or a monster effect to answer this.
So I do want to clarify one thing. You have to pay 700 during each standby phase. That counts your opponents.
Okay, but that's not... So the turn you flip it, you're not paying anything. It starts on your turn.
It starts on whatever the next standby phase is. So for full turn cycle, it's 1,400 life points because it's 700 during your turn, 700 during your opponent's, etc.
So this is what it's going to come down to, right? Like I don't think that's actually really relevant because again, I was making this claim with like a new card game player. We were playing Arcana on the weekend. Like if a card doesn't actually lose you the game and it gives you such a huge advantage, even if you're at 1 life point and this card wins you the game because of it, like it did its job regardless of what your life points was. Like this card's effect is fucking amazing.
But it also negates your spells too, remember?
But you would put this in a deck where like it is good for you, right? Like that's one of the great things about like Yu-Gi-Oh! There's so many cards over time that would probably be okay with this. If you're building your deck and the only thing that it loses to is potentially like a spell effect, like and you're playing around that, like that seems very, very good for 700 life points per standby phase. The question is that actually that good? In Hearthstone, when I play this, yeah, I fucking play this hard. Oh my god, in Hearthstone this would be disgusting. But in Yu-Gi-Oh! Where monsters effects are so strong, but like yeah, that's a good effect. God, this is like a teeter-totter, because like you can go either way on this one. It's so good in the right matchup, though. I feel like in older Yu-Gi-Oh! This was really good. I'm just trying to think of like a modern how good this would actually be. Because you've spoken to me like in older Yu-Gi-Oh! Like spell cards were so powerful. So does it really progress that far throughout Yu-Gi-Oh!'s history to where we are now for this card to still be that good and relevant? I'm gonna go with it's probably... Oh my god, I want to say it's actually really good.
You're struggling with this one. You're struggling.
This one's tough because it's like I've seen I've seen monster effects that are fucking broken. So like is this really gonna be sure. So like that's what I mean. Like in the early days of Yu-Gi-Oh, I could see this being extremely good because monsters effects weren't just like, oh, let me fuck your board up, right? It was just like I play this monster effect, like it's got big stats, and like you need a spell to actually interact with me.
Sure.
In modern Yu-Gi-Oh, like I've seen Sword Soul, and even Sword Soul like has very like good effects to just be like, okay, I don't care about this card whatsoever. I think in modern, like it's probably not as good, but the thing is like this card is just so like it's just such a powerful effect. I feel like you have to think about it, which makes me believe it's good.
and I think it probably is banned. I think this is like a scary ass card to have in the game. So I'm gonna risk it. I think it is banned.
Sure. Final answer. You don't sound convinced.
I could go either way here, but because you won't let me go in the middle. Like I have to say banned. So I will go with banned.
Final answer.
Final answer.
You're correct. I'm not even gonna put you through it. Yes, Imperial Order. What would you do if I told you this is the errata version of this card?
Wow, that's pretty disgusting. Wait, what's the non-errata version?
The original version of Imperial Order, the original version is optional. So you had the choice to turn it off on your own standby phase. Well, first of all, you only had to pay the 700 during your standby phase for one, not both. Then you could turn it off on your own turn instead of paying for it, where the current version, once it's active, it's not optional. So you have to pay for it until you can no longer pay for it or it gets destroyed somehow. So the old version of Imperial Order would work like this. You would go, your opponent activates a spell, you would chain Imperial Order, negate it, then on your turn, you would let it go to the graveyard and activate all your spells all you want, because you don't care. It just negated any spell card, essentially.
Oh, I get you.
So it was incredibly busted, incredibly broken, got banned very quickly, and then they decided, for some unbeknown reason, just for some inconceivable reason, they're like, you know what? We can bring Imperial Order back. Let's give it some tweaks. Let's make it a bit more balanced, in quotes, and let's see what happens. And they released it, and it was banned very quickly after they errated it, because they're like, oh shit, this card is still just as bad as it was before.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, so the thing is, like you're talking about when it comes to monster effects, yes, monster effects in Yu-Gi-Oh! Do a lot, but the thing is, especially because I said this before with Masterpiece specifically, Yu-Gi-Oh! Decks, modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Decks, for the most part, are all comprised of monsters and spells. It's like 20 monsters, 20 spells, you know, there's a lot of spell density in Yu-Gi-Oh! Decks, just because the spells typically get you to the monsters, right? Also, when you look at a card like Super Polymerization, for instance, there are cards that, if you go first, you set up a board, your opponent is going to typically break your board with spell cards, because those are the cards that can be activated immediately. Ideally, if you have a way that you can get Imperial Order out of the deck and send it to the field on your first turn, or if you just draw it because you're good like that, then you set up your board, as soon as your opponent's turn starts, you just flip Imperial Order, now you've maybe just shut off like half of the cards in their hand, and now they're not going to be able to play the game. The cards they were used to break your border offline, just everything. So it didn't matter. Like, the game was just over it. And so, rightfully so, this card is banned and it's never coming back.
Yep, makes sense.
Yep. It's funny, though, that it took you that long to arrive at that conclusion, though.
It's tough, because, like, again, Monsters Effect seems so good, so is it really... In my Hearthstone brain, I'm like, is that really that good? In Hearthstone, this is fucking gross. I would play this card.
Right. Like, if you had to pay 3 life or 2 life every turn to make sure your opponent couldn't play spells, I think you would play that in Hearthstone. Like, that would be insane.
Yeah. Oh my god, yeah, you're perfect.
Last one for you.
Just stick in mind, opponent controls more monsters than you do. Your opponent cannot activate monster effects or declare an attack. You can't. If you control more monsters than your opponent does, you cannot activate monster effects or declare an attack. Once per turn during the end phase, all players control the same number of monsters to destroy this card.
Whoa. This is a newer card. This is like from 2019, I want to say. So this is a newer card.
It's like a pro and a con, but man, if you're going like so, remind me, spell cards you can. I know I should know this by now, but spell cards you can activate your opponent's turn.
So this is a field spell. Field spell is like a continuous spell, but there's a designated zone for it.
How do you know it's a field spell? So I know.
So there's that little star cross-shaped logo next to the spell card. So you would put that there, and you have to play it on your turn. I will say that there are a couple cards in Yu-Gi-Oh! That allow you to activate a field spell directly from your opponent. Now, whether or not you think that's good or not is a different story, but I'm just letting you know that there are those cards that exist.
Okay. Now, those spells you speak of, that means if my opponent is activating a monster and I use one of those spells to proc this field spell, their effect does not go through? If I have no monsters, if I have less monsters than I do?
I think based off of how you've read the card, that's an accurate description of the game.
I'm just trying to make sure I understand everything. If that is the case, this card seems disgusting. But it's only monsters effects. Weird, it's like Imperial Order monsters. They thought about a little more than it has to do field spell. Oh my god, I think this is good. That it's like, this is such a good fuck you to your opponent. Because if you're going, like, if your opponent goes first and you
could play this, you stop a lot. Like, I'm just thinking, like, again, Sword Soul is like the only thing I really understand from Yu-Gi-Oh! So play against me, like, I'm just gonna concede. I'm just gonna move on. Like, I don't know how I win the game. I guess maybe like I can't. My opponent can really do a lot as soon as they add more monsters to me. So this is like a really well designed card. I like the. I don't know why this is on the toxic list. What are the? I guess like maybe it does feel really bad if your opponent rips this if you're going first because like they kind of stop their whole turn. I can see that. Or like would it rather be max seed? Oh, I guess this is less toxic than max seed. Let me think about this in Hearthstone terms. Okay, if my opponent goes first, they're aggro. Can't play on their turn, so I play it the following turn. They can no longer attack. They lose the game. I win. Yeah, that seems pretty good. Okay. They play monsters. I put this on the field. They stop playing the game. They look very upset across the table for me. I probably won the medical damage too. Yeah, I think that's pretty good. Okay, it's probably good. Now, is it banned? Imperial Order's banned for spells. Mystic might be banned for monsters. Yes. Then you just spell. You can use spells to kill this, right? I think that's helpful.
I mean, you could have used spells. Well, you could have used spells to kill Imperial Order, but you could have used traps or monsters to kill.
Yeah, that's fair, but I feel like, I don't know, maybe I have the wrong impression of, like, how powerful spells are in Yu-Gi-Oh! It seems very, very good.
I think that's accurate.
Yeah.
Like, I think I don't know if this is, maybe you can tell me at the end of the right answers, but I feel like spells are greater than monsters, and then monsters are greater than traps, but maybe I'm wrong. I feel like there's, like, an order that they should be going in, and spells are the best thing in Yu-Gi-Oh! Like, just based on pot greed, everything from there. But I don't know. I feel like this card isn't banned. I feel like it's probably playable. But I can see why you put this on the list. I do think the card is really interesting. I can get the frustration of like why this would be upsetting to a player. But I do think a card like this is cool. So like I think it's playable. But I don't think it's.
Okay, so for the record, I have it that you said this is a really well designed card. Is that correct?
Whoa. From a gameplay perspective, I think it's like a well-designed card. From an emotional standpoint, I think that depends on the context.
I see. So it's the psychic damage that you're really going for.
Yes.
I see.
Imagine, okay, like Imperial Order, right? Your opponent sees it. Like, what mental damage you're going to do, though? They probably lost or won, depending on what their deck is, right? Like you said, half their deck is offline, so it's like they're fucked, right? Mystic Mine is kind of like, okay, they play this card against me. And then I can be like, okay, maybe I stop playing minions so then they can't play anymore. Or I keep seeing minions, but like monsters. Right? There's like a little like, you know, like, okay, they kind of fuck me, let me fuck them back, you know? Like, you know what I'm saying? Like,
to me, your sub sound. That should be your
I feel like Imperial Order, like, you as the opponent, like, that's not playing Imperial Order, you have no agency on who's getting fucked. At least with Mystic Mind, like, you do get some agency in who's getting fucked here, which is great.
Like, well, Imperial Order counters Mystic Mind for it.
Exactly. So, like, you don't get any agency in who's getting fucked. So, like, I feel like in terms of context, like, it can't be that bad. I don't know if it's, like, a really well-designed card, but I do like the fact that you can be like, okay, let me stop so I don't play into this more, and then, therefore, maybe my opponent can't play very well, or, like, they can't do, like, a very optimal turn because they have no room or whatever. Space, I don't know what to call it, like virtual space, because if they play more monsters than me, then they're fucked, whatever. Yeah, I think that's really interesting. So, because of that, I think it's played, but I don't think it's banned.
Final answer. I cannot wait for you to see the reactions I was doing while you were describing this, because this, aside from Max C, might be the most toxic card I have showed you on this entire list.
I feel like, okay, so before I even begin, let me try to.
Oh, he has to defend himself. He has to defend himself now. Okay.
If you're doing the fucking, and you know what, you're doing the fucking, it's fine. But as soon as your opponent starts fucking you down, then it's a problem. Okay, I understand. All right, continue.
Okay. Mystic Mine is a card. Mystic Mine is a card. So it's had a very interesting trajectory in Yu-Gi-Oh's history. So where Mystic Mine actually started was. It was actually the centerpiece of a burn strategy, if you can believe that, because people realized, oh, if I just drop Mystic Mine on my opponent's board, all their monsters can't do anything. Obviously, a lot of decks in Yu-Gi-Oh are primarily comprised of monsters and like spells that like typically get you 2 monsters or do something of the like. Mystic Mine's going to shut them down. I play 0 monsters in my deck, and then I'm just going to play a bunch of burn cards, and I have as many turns as I want because they can't attack me. They can't use their effects. So what do? They're just sitting there. They just lose. I can play all these burn cards that take 4, 5, 6 turns for me to actually kill the opponent. And if they don't have a way to deal with the Mystic Mine, then I win. So that was the first time we ever really saw this card being played, and so a lot of people just thought it was going to be this gimmicky, annoying card that you'd have to see going up against a burn deck, and you would just have to have something maybe in your sideboard to like possibly prevent that from happening. What ended up happening is that people thought, why don't we just play this in good decks? Why don't we play this in our modern good decks? And here's how the games would typically go. The player going first would build their board, do whatever, and pass the turn. The player going second would throw everything in their hand at the opponent's board to bait out every negation that they had, and then at the end of it all would activate Mystic Mine, and they would just pass. And the opponent wouldn't have an out to Mystic Mine in their deck, so they just deck out because they probably dug 6, 7, 8 cards deep into their deck from searching for cards, special summoning cards, whatever, and they could pass for 20, 30 turns, and the opponent, if they don't play an out to Mystic Mine that isn't a monster effect, they just lost the game. So competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! Devolved into this absolute disgusting state where it was you got to play the Mystic Mine game. And people started sideboarding cards for Mystic Mine specifically to out it, obviously, because when you're playing any competitive game, it's going to happen. The problem then became Mystic Mine would be played in the same way, but the player who activated Mystic Mine would take a few turns, get a few cards in hand, set some cards down because your max hand limit is 6, so maybe you set some of your spell cards face down so you effectively have more cards in hand, right? Then after like 3, 4 turns, they would look at their hand and say, okay, I can kill you on this turn. So then they would, typically decks would have field spells that you could either play over Mystic Mine or they'd have a way to get rid of the Mystic Mine themselves, and then they could just clear their opponent's board and then get rid of the Mystic Mine and then put 8,000 damage on the field and kill the opponent. So if the player didn't draw out to the Mystic Mine before that happened, then it was just GG. And it was absolutely miserable. People just despised having to play against this card, and people were begging for this card to be banned, list after list, and they just kept ignoring it until finally the prayers were answered, and this card was ultimately banned, and thank fuck for that, because this card is fucking atrocious.
I don't even know the whole time you're explaining that. I'm trying not to laugh. It's not my description. We can summarize this card as you fuck me, I fuck you. Alright.
Yep. They may as well just print that as the title of the card, because that's exactly what it is. It's just such a... That's why I commented that you said this was a well-designed card, because it is anything...
Okay, so, to be fair, from an outsider's perspective, I truly don't know how this card actually plays. Like, I think...
Sure, of course.
I think the mini-game behind it, like, maybe I'm living in Disneyland, but, like, in Hearthstone, right? Like, if there's 2 minion-based boards in the game, then I try to think about, like, okay, like, if I play more minions, then I get screwed over. So then I have to play around that. And then it becomes this, like, weird, like, cat and mouse game of, like, who's going to play more minions, etc. for their effects or whatever, right? But Hearthstone also, like, is not as explosive as Yu-Gi-Oh! I want to say, so maybe, like, that slow build-up of a game makes this card less toxic in a game like Hearthstone. After you describing what happens in Yu-Gi-Oh! I can totally understand where people are coming from. I feel like the play style of stopping my opponent and then just keep ending my turn so my opponent deck out, like, that is fucking, that's awful. That is not...
There are written feature matches. I can send you this if you want to see it. There are literally written feature matches where someone activated Mystic Mine and the next 60 lines of text are player A passed, player B passed, player C passed, player...
That's awful. That's awful. Yeah. To give Konami some credit, I truly think that they didn't intend for that to happen. Like, they probably thought, like, the same thing I'm going with. Like, oh, it's like that weird game now. Like, do you play more monsters or not, right? I totally understand, like, what actually happened in practicality is disgusting. Like, that sounds miserable to play against, so I understand.
Well, at least we got you there. At least we got you.
You got your fucking thumbnail for this video.
I got my thumbnail, 100%. I already know what's going on the thumbnail. Well, that's it, Rare. That's it for some of Yu-Gi-Oh's most toxic cards. What do you think? What do you think?
This game still sucks. Always has, always will. It's that fucking beef with the guy in the space. You probably know what I'm talking about. Okay.
So guys, that's going to wrap it up for another video. I really hope you all enjoyed. Let's go ahead and shout the patrons for all of their continued support. So shout out to Shout1317, Zoom00x3, MBT Play Madolce, Moto, Cameron L. Smith, The Synchro Guy, Pony Stark, and Rhythm and Homan, Little Family, Draconic, Dylan Rare Hunter, JW11860, Brian Dancer of Class 7, Final Daddy, Twinkle Muncher, literally all of the guinea pigs, Cheeks McLapperty, Stolfin Amethyst, Wonder Waffle, MET cancelled by community soon, cancelled by a committee soon, cancelled by a player soon, Corvain, Absolute Angriest Peacock of the Edison Club, Daniel Howell, and Life Keeps Using Solemn Judgment on my hopes and dreams. Thank you all so much again for watching, and we will see you next time. Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel for the JoJo Lands Chapter 18 review, which is an amazing, action-filled chapter, very light on the dialogue this month, and just carries you through these pages with its incredible art, suspense, and comedic tone. But there is, of course, still a lot to discuss and break down as we reach the climax of this arc, fighting against Lulu and Bobby Jean, with a few twists and turns along the way. But before we get into the chapter this month, we also have the release of the JoJo Lands Volume 4, which comes alongside an alternate artwork on this month's Ultra Jump, so that's two really nice artworks this month, especially if you love yellow. Personally, I'm a fan. Go crazy with it, Araki. And I believe these are the first cover illustrations to now include the complete main cast with Charming Man, who's fitting right in. So Volume 4 contains chapters 13 through 16, starting with the Jodio and Dragoda flashback, and then covers the start of the Slam Registry heist. So this is a pretty chunky arc so far, already 5 chapters in, and I'd say we probably have 2 more to go until things wrap up with these enemy stand users. But I think that highlights the structure of Part 9, and is that the story arcs aren't being separated strictly by stand fights, but rather each heist the game goes on, which naturally just allow things to have a larger scale and creates a more dynamic story, as I'd say what's just as important as the fight right now are the movements of the lava rock, which are actually influencing the outcome of the fight and working in the background, like constantly bringing more characters and wildcards onto the pages. And alongside the new volume, we also got another animated emotional trailer, which is really well done, highlighting the fight against Charmy, visualizing his ability, him joining the cast, and the introduction of Howler. And speaking of Charming Man's stand, we finally got an extra page in Volume 4 explaining his ability a bit more, where Araki says his rough sand-like skin can crumble like puzzle pieces or piles up to transform him into another person. Also, he can blend into his surroundings by manipulating the perception of light reflection. So it's still a pretty vague explanation that doesn't really connect the ability through one idea. So it's just like Dr. Wu's fragmenting combined with Metallica's camouflage, I guess? But like, how does the skin reflect light so well? Is the light reflection what allows him to appear to be another person, or is that just the fragments molding into the shape of another person? So still some questions, but I don't think this was supposed to be a very technical concept stand, as it was revealed around the time of its appearance that Araki was inspired by the art style Cubism, and would just kind of roll with the idea without thinking. As he said during an exhibition when showing off this artwork, saying, "I wanted to draw a scene with flying, birds, and clouds together, but with a person in it. While drawing something like that, I thought it looked like Cubism. I was probably a bit influenced by this style. It's quite difficult to draw him blending in with the clouds. Really challenging. I just thought it looked similar to Cubism, so I went with it. It wasn't really planned, just happened to be." And I kinda love that, just Araki's pure artistic intuition of draw first, think later, and it all works out, and now Charmy has a pretty dope stand where he can essentially turn into a Cubism piece of art. With all the new stuff covered, I think it's about time we get into the latest chapter. So starting with the cover page, we have a clean illustration of the deadly duo Lulu Bobby, and turning the page, we are welcomed into the chapter with... oh, that's Gore on my comfort characters. Picking things up right where we left off, with the gang all being attacked by Glory Day's ability of slowed bullets. Although this double-page spread just acts as a reminder, as we immediately cut away to a different scene with Lulu and Bobby just chilling in the lobby with some pretty random dialogue about how Lulu wants Bobby to adopt her and be a part of his family. Although Bobby is extremely put off by this idea, mostly because he knows that Lulu is batshit crazy, but he lets her down kinda easy, saying that, well, he's already got 3 kids of his own, and that kids are pretty expensive, as well as that if Lulu was his child, he would not put up with these little temper tantrums, and that he's only buying her this stuff because they're working together. This then causes Lulu to start crying, who was under the impression that Bobby was buying her this stuff because he loved her. But I think this is more so just Lulu upset that she's being told no, or is trying to guilt trip. Either way, I'm not really sure what the purpose of this detour was, or if this scene will hold any relevance in the future. It gave us some insight into the characters, like Bobby is a family man, while Lulu is an orphan with
member of family, although those facts don't really add much to them in the context of the story right now, and I doubt these two will be sticking around much after their fight ends. So like, the only way I see this interaction being relevant is if by the end of the fight, for whatever reason, Bobby gains sympathy for Lulu and does decide to adopt her, or maybe that would be a sweet conclusion to the fight instead of both of them just dying or getting beat up and being tired. So by the end of their little heart-to-heart, Bobby tries to lighten the mood and tells her, "Oh, don't worry, good things will come your way eventually, I'm sure," which reminds Lulu of her mission ordered by Akka to get the lava rock, which could be some light foreshadowing for Lulu eventually getting her hands on the lava rock, is that, yeah, good things will come her way. So we start to get a sense of time here, as Lulu mentions they should probably go back to floor B1 to see if the gang are all dead. And Bobby is like, yeah, they're probably dead. Maybe. Almost like he doesn't even want to go back to check. So he's very nonchalant about this whole mission, really. Like, being an assassin is his 9-to-5 job. He's lost passion and doesn't really care anymore. And it's just like, okay, I guess we can go take a look and make sure they're dead. And as they begin to head back, we see that while they were waiting, they also did some research on the game and were able to find records on Paco Labyrinthus, who was actually in the military briefly before he ended up being dishonorably discharged. And if you remember, in Chapter 1, Jodio had said that Paco used to be pretty chubby, but then he went away for a year and came back chiseled as a rock. So he must have joined the army before finishing high school, but it didn't work out, dishonorably discharged, so now he's 19 years old and still in school, which unfortunately debunks the Paco rock human hibernation theory, but that's 2 times now Araki has mentioned Paco's past, so it would be nice at some point to get a full flashback chapter to further develop this character and show us some of the emotions he may be struggling with in his personal life that could be related to his dishonorable discharge, and remember the mention of domestic abuse that left his ear scarred, which could have resulted in his violent tendencies or kleptomania, so quite a bit going on in Paco's past that seems to have impacted him. And with that idea in mind of emotional impact during formative years, I think we can start to see a theme emerging around the main cast. As in pretty much all parts of JoJo, the cast always have a common theme that unifies and allows the characters to relate to each other through a shared experience where the reader relate to them, and just creates a cohesive theme for narrative's sake and synergy between the characters. In Part 8, it's mommy issues, in Part 7, daddy issues, and in Part 9, what I'm noticing for the most part is that the main cast are all still dealing with the effects of a personal trauma, and it's impacted them in a negative way, but hasn't made them bad people, kind of similar to the lives of the Golden Wind cast. Jodio and Dragona's whole flashback of bullies, abuse, and abandonment from their father has led them down this path of crime and misjudgment of right and wrong. Especially Jodio has developed a serious form of antisocial personality disorder. Paco is violent and loves to steal things for no reason. Usagi is suspected to have a substance abuse problem. He was seen in Chapter 1 buying drugs and is called a junkie repeatedly, although we still don't know much about his past yet. And Charmy is entirely driven by revenge. After losing his brother, he's now seeking answers and tried to kill the main cast over a lava rock, so he's also not being led down a great path. So I would keep that in mind as the part continues, how people change due to trauma and the different ways people work through it and overcome. But coming back to the chapter, so Lulu and Bobby are going to go see what happened. Meanwhile, we transition back to the beginning with the gang getting attacked, and we get this great sequence of pages where everyone gets to show off their stand and defend themselves from the bullets, which are still moving slow even after making contact with them, and slow enough for everyone to escape the attack without suffering serious damage. Dragona uses smooth operators to just pick up the bullets and take them out of Paco. They're moving that slow. Charmy uses big mouth strikes again to fragment a part of his neck and then reassemble it after the bullet passes. Really cool use there. And Jodio takes a hit through the cheek, but is actually able to use November Rain inside his mouth to deflect the bullet outwards. So it was nice to see all of these characters deal with the situation in their own way, quickly. So although they were able to escape the attack, they weren't actually able to stop the bullets, as earlier we saw them still slipping out of Smooth Operator's hands, and they carry forward until hitting the wall. Paco then calls out that this is bad, man. We have multiple enemies coming after us. It's all happening so quickly. Although Jodio, thinking on a much larger scale, big brain, realizes that this is actually a good thing. If they have multiple pursuers coming after them, it means the lava rock is doing something, and it must already be taking assets away from Howler. We then check up on Usagi, who still isn't doing too well. This man has been suffering for like 3 months straight now, And he makes the most cursed MRI machine. It's just a huge-ass Mate Kudasai that takes up the entire room. He's like inside its mouth. It's all you can see from the doorway. But nevertheless, it works apparently, so we just have to do the scan now while Jodio and Paco stay lookout. Paco then reflects on the attack, saying that the enemy is using a silencer because he heard it, and his ability must be to make the bullets move slowly, which allows him to kill without anyone realizing where they're shot from. And I gotta be honest and say that so far Glory Days is pretty underwhelming. So we saw Bobby unload 12 shots from his pistol, then what we didn't see apparently was him collecting the empty cartridges, then getting on an elevator to a different floor and just waited for the bullets to hit them. But this ability isn't auto-pursuing or auto-tracking, so there's no way for him to know if the bullets actually hit anyone. So it's just not that great of an ability at all, assuming the effect can only be applied to bullets. As in order for this attack to be effective, he needed the game to stand still for about a minute, not notice bullets were coming at them, hope no one else gets in front of the bullets, and then after they hit their target, hope they don't do anything to defend themselves, like they did, even though he knows that this is a group of stand users. So it just feels like this stand is gun, but with extra steps and less efficient. And the only reason Bobby is using its power is to protect himself from not being suspected of murder, making sure he's never in the same room where the attack happens, which is cool in the sense that it's like a Hitman-style ability, planting silent bullets around an area that slowly encroach on their target. But when going up against another stand user, it just seems pretty ineffective, especially when the person can be like, oh shit, I'm being shot right now, better stop that. So the chapter continues with the game splitting up into groups. Jodio and Paco, the boys, as always, go track down the enemy, while Dragona and Charmy stay to help Usagi with his MRI, and try to use Big Mouth Strikes again to track down the bag screw. These stand names really don't roll off the tongue, do they? Although these two kind of forget that an MRI uses magnetic resonance, which stalls out their plan. Everything metal begins being pulled towards the Mate Kudasai. And I love how like half of the problems the game encounters are caused by themselves and their incompetence. And even Jodio can't finish giving himself stitches because the pin is being dragged away. So while they're dealing with the MRI, the elevator opens, Jodio and Paco enter high alert, looking out for the enemy. Although it's just a group of innocent women, at first. Paco says he's gonna go check out the first floor, but when entering the elevator, he comes face to face with Bobby and Lulu. Although they don't know what the enemy looks like, why would he suspect this old man and little girl? But it creates this excellent moment of tension with Bobby holding the gun behind his back, which is like the last thing you would expect from this old man, like from Paco's perspective, just looking at these people. And it's just one of those moments in a manga that you can vividly imagine animated. And after a few long stares, the tension is released, and they all go their separate ways. So Bobby and Lulu are somehow surprised that the stand users all survived, and change plans to take them out one by one. And as Paco enters the elevator, he walks right into a trap set by Glory Days, as a full mag of bullets approaches. But because the stand is kind of ass, Paco is able to defend himself by using the hustle to grab onto a metal panel in the elevator, and makes a sort of turtle shell out of it and blocks most of the shots. Although one of the bullets is deflected and cuts a suspension cord or something that causes the elevator to crash. I believe that's supposed to be shown in the middle panel here, but I really can't make out what the bullets are hitting, but for whatever reason it crashes Paco down to the bottom floor. And this brings us to the final scene of the chapter, which is through the perspective of the Dolphin Bank representative from the last chapter who was talking to Akka, who recaps their situation a bit and says that all of the nerves from talking big money upset his stomach, so he just so happens to stop by the same hospital this fight is taking place. And as he approaches the front door, directly in front of the crashed elevator, he's shot dead by a stray bullet from Glory Days, and drops a whole bunch of documents onto the floor, thus concluding the chapter and showing us once again the power of the lava rock manipulating the flow of money towards Jodio by any means necessary. So we've seen the same situation play out a few times now, which poses the question, how long has the lava rock really been working? Did the lava rock make Paco get into the elevator? Did it make Bobby Jean attack? Did it cause the ricochet bullet? It definitely made this banker get an upset stomach to bring the documents here, so it's just really scary to see that there is nothing that could possibly overcome this power, because its power is reality itself. It's not creating a spontaneous or absurd calamity like Wonder of You. It's not magically teleporting an attack like Love Train. It's just what is, and there's nothing to even fight against, as it removes any free will that once existed from those under its influence, using them as pawns in a larger game they don't even know they're playing. And for an ability that is this grandiose and integrated into reality fate, gravity, it makes me wonder if the power really is just about the flow of money and asset transfer, giving land from one person to the other, or a dollar bill. Maybe there's something so much deeper behind this rock and its source and its purpose in nature that we are yet to discover or even understand. But whatever the case may be, I can assure you guys one thing: Araki is cooking, and I'm sticking around to find out what. So pretty good chapter. Honestly, I thought the fight would have progressed a bit more than it did, or that we'd finally see Usagi, but at least now Jodio should know Bobby and Lulu are the enemy. If you heard Paco's streams from the elevator, they'll be face-to-face at the start of the next chapter. So thank you all so much for watching. Like if you enjoyed, subscribe for more. I'll talk to you all real soon in a new video. Until then, I'm out. Peace.